Morning. So I decided to go for a walk this morning and just get myself one of these amazing peanut butter smoothies with 2 shots of coffee in it, um, from the coffee shop, which is just behind me there, and it's a couple of 100 metres from Bazina House. So quite a bit's happened since I last updated you all. I think my last update was on Sunday, and Paul was just about to go in and have a drain put into the abscess that's sort of causing the infection around the stomach area. So that didn't happen on Sunday, and it ended up happening sort of halfway through Monday, just because it's treated as an emergency through the emergency department or something, and obviously actual emergencies came up. So he got bumped. So Monday that happened. He came out of that in an extraordinary amount of pain, and so they were giving him all sorts of alternative pain relief to try and get him through that. So there was a couple of days there where he was just waking up, being in a lot of pain, getting a shot of morphine or some other type of heavy duty opioid, and which would probably knock him out. So he's just slept through a good part of 3 days really. In that time they've also changed the endovac that goes in through the nasogastric tube, that I explained, with the little sponge that sits inside the stomach, or just in the hole that's in the stomach. And yeah, still running and spiking, big temperatures, constantly being monitored for sepsis. It's been a rough few days. Yesterday they decided they were going to there wasn't much output out of the extra drain that they put into his abdomen, through his abdomen, and so they came in on, I guess, Tuesday afternoon. The nurses actually pushed some saline fluid into it to try and flush it. And what came out was a bit of a chunky bit of blood clot, I suppose, which then allowed it to drain a bit better, but still not a huge amount of output, which we both sort of said that's a bit disappointing considering how much pain he went through to have it installed, that it didn't really produce much output. So yesterday they said they were going to try something new, and the way it was described to us by the upper GI doctor was, this is pretty new technology, and basically what they wanted to do was the hole that they'd made in his abdomen to put the drain in, not the brain, the drain, they're going to widen it, and then through that tract put a tube, I suppose, and through that tube they can put a camera, go in and have a look inside that cavity, have a bit of a little expedition of exploration, and then if they needed to they could put instruments through there. And the intent of that procedure was to, from the outside, clean out the inside of that cavity, because basically his body just was struggling to get on top of that infection. So this was a way to get some of that infected material out of there, which will help him to help his body along, allow the antibiotics to be more effective, I suppose, and do their work. So that was the plan, and while they had him under the general anaesthetic, they were intending to also replace the endovac sponge setup. So he was out in theatre for a couple of hours, and they brought him back to his ward late-ish, about 6:30. I walked into his room, he was sound asleep, and I stood there looking at him thinking something's different. And then I realised that he did no longer have the nasogastric tube coming out of his nose, which I can only think is good news. And of course we speculated wildly on what that means, and by the time I left at 8 o'clock last night we hadn't seen a doctor to ask any questions, so I don't know for sure, but I'm hoping that that means the hole in his stomach has healed enough that he doesn't need that endovac any longer, and that the drain which was left in after they finished that procedure, they've left a drain coming out of his abdomen, but it's much thicker. It's about the thickness of my thumb in diameter, so it's quite, to use a car term analogy, it's like the high flow diesel pumps that you get at the petrol station for the trucks. It's like the difference between the old drain and the new drain is the difference between the car diesel pump and the truck diesel pump. And that does have what I think is a negative pressure system drain on it, but it's not the endovac type. I don't really know how it works. Maybe that's my question for today. So all in all, the last 4 days has been really, really pretty crappy. But I left on a high note yesterday. He was so delighted to have that thing out of his nose, and I'm sure some of you I know out there have had it. I've never had it, so I can only imagine how uncomfortable it is. But I know some of you have commented on it, so I am maybe not quite as delighted as him, but I'm coming close. So that's the update. Today is Thursday. I think it's the 30th of August. So I'm going to head down there shortly after I finish my peanut butter delight, and hopefully get some news, and perhaps I'll tack that on to the end of this video so you get a double whammy of good news in one post. So I think that's about it for now. Oh, the other news is unfortunately he got kicked out of his single room because someone needed it more than him. But that's okay. Sometimes a change is good when you've been staring at the same four walls for so long. It's nice to have a change, even if it's a smaller area. And actually, the ward he's in, there's some nice people in there, so that's nice. Yeah. Okay, well, cheerio from sunny Sydney, and I'll see you all soon.
Good morning. It's Saturday the 31st of August. So, update from my last little snippet. Saw Paul yesterday. He was a little better again. Small steps at the moment. He was still running a fever, on and off. It did hit 39 at one point, but didn't stay there for very long. They're just doing blood cultures and urine samples and watching for sepsis still, but he does generally seem to be improving. The fevers don't seem to be lasting quite as long. He's not getting the whole body rattle shakes. He is still telling me some pretty interesting stories. In the middle of his fevers, does still get a little bit of confusion. Woke up at one point and thought he was at a quiz night and was a bit annoyed with me for not knowing the right answer to a question I didn't know had been asked. So, you know, it's keeping me on my toes. So he wasn't able to do much. He's very, very low in energy. He did get up out of bed briefly to weigh himself. He's lost about 4 kilos, which, you know, we expected, I suppose, and it's not as dramatic as his last peritonectomy, where he lost, I think, about 15 kilos. And he had bulked up in weight before the operation, specifically in preparation for this, so we're not panicking about that. He got out of bed, jumped on the scales. When I say jumped, wobbled. He wasn't really able to stay out of bed for more than that, so we quickly changed his sheets around him and put him back to bed. He did get up later in the afternoon, briefly, and just stood up for 2 or 3 minutes and then went back to bed. But every little bit counts, right? And movement is good for him, so he's working hard. His body's working really, really hard at the moment. They've also given him, they call them the monkey bars. I don't know what you call them in other countries, but it's just the pole that attaches to the bed and goes over your head and has a little handle so you can kind of pull yourself. He's using that to do a little bit of exercise. So over the weekend, the plan is just to let the drain that they've put in do its work. And it is draining very, very well. There's a lot of pretty disgusting stuff coming out of it at a reasonable rate, actually. So no wonder he was feeling really ill. So that's the weekend. Today, if he's feeling well enough, I'm going to take a wheelchair over from Bazina House. Okay, so the stomach is shaped a bit like a bean. So if your head is up here, Paul with his big schnoz. Oh, no, let's put the schnoz in the right spot. Let's make that an ear. So you've got your esophagus, and then at the bottom of the esophagus is the stomach, which is sort of shaped a bit like a bean, I think. Kind of like that. So as I understand it, what we've got is a little hole, say here, and if this is his sort of abdominal cavities here, and then coming out of the stomach, you've got all the intestines and paraphernalia. So we've got a little hole here, and gastric juices and the little bit of water he's drinking are leaking out of there, and what they've done is created an abscess. Now in my mind I was thinking, oh, it's like a little blister on the outside, but actually how it's been described to me is more of a shape like this. And so they had the tube that was going down through his nose, down into his stomach, and they had the little sponge sort of sitting here, soaking all that gross liquid in this cavity, soaking it that way and vacuuming it that way. What they've done now is they've come in through the abdominal wall and they've put a drain in here. With a sort of a dry, what do they call it? Forget, I'll put it on the screen. A dry something drain, which is quite wide, and the fluid is coming out of that at a reasonable rate. So in the 24 hours he'd had it in when I left him yesterday, I think there was about 600 or 700 mils, a bit over half a litre, which, you know, doesn't sound like much, but if it's sitting in there and it's full of infection, that is quite a lot of fluid. So hopefully that helps. Please feel free to admire my very advanced drawing skills. And yeah, so the plan is to leave that drain in. This one's now been removed, and the gastroenterology team on Monday have a provisional plan where they think what they're going to do is come in through this tract that this drain has created, and they can put some instruments in through that access point and attempt to stitch this hole up. Now that they're satisfied that they've got a good exit point for any material that's in there, in theory, if they close that hole, it will stop any more fluid draining into the cavity, and allow it obviously to drain what's there to drain out. It then seals up the stomach to the point where maybe he can start having some clear fluids, which is beyond exciting for him. Yes, so that's the provisional plan. We'll see how that goes, subject to a few ifs, one of which is he doesn't get any worse over the weekend, but he does seem to be improving with this arrangement. So there you go.